Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the show. Got a quick episode to update you on the weekend. So over the weekend, we had June 14th, the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army. Happy birthday, Army. We had Father's Day as well on Sunday. But we also had Trump's birthday and widespread protest that evolved into riots all over the country. The estimates are about 5 million people participated in these protests. Now, I lined out most likely course of action and most dangerous course of action on both my backup channel, Mike Glover Stories, as well as my Patreon, which is the uncensored version of this episode, which can be found in the links down below. Now, most likely was these protests were going to evolve into riots, and they were going to burn buildings to the ground, and there was going to be widespread violence across the board, attacking officers, including local, state, and federal, and also doing wide-scale damage. We landed somewhere between that and the most dangerous course of action, because the most dangerous course of action was there was going to be a shooting of some kind in the middle of these protests. Protesters were going to blame law enforcement or the authorities or the administration, and the administration was going to blame violent protesters. Now, the reason we're somewhere in between, and you likely haven't seen that, at least on the corporate national media, is because they're not even talking about it. I couldn't find this story, for example, in my own backyard of 10,000 peaceful protesters and that evolving into a shooting that took somebody's life. Now, it's a very confusing story, but we'll get into that. But why would you not be able to find that? Or, for example, in Portland, Oregon, where several officers were injured in a skirmish between rioters and the police and federal authorities that were protecting an ICE detention facility that was breached. The protesters that evolved into rioters were trying to breach the doors. Now, there were several arrests, and I've seen the video of them interacting, but there's no news on this. Nobody's covering it. Well, it doesn't fit the narrative. That's why. Because if all the news stories were, hey, there are LAPD officers being pelted with bricks, frozen water bottles, commercial-grade fireworks, it wouldn't be good for the other side. So it's not being talked about. I only found this story about Salt Lake City through the local news stations, including KSL. Let's just run this story so you guys can get up to date on it.
And then next thing I know, one of them pulls out a handgun.
And now, a day later,
this incident unfolded very quickly.
Salt Lake City police are providing context to a shooting that ended up killing a man.
Our preliminary investigation shows that our victim was not the intended target, but rather an innocent bystander participating in the demonstration.
According to investigators, the guys in green vests were apparent peacekeepers with the protest group, and they watched a man identified as 24-year-old Arturo Gamboa go behind a wall, pull out a rifle, and begin to manipulate it.
Witnesses say Gamboa raised the weapon in a firing position and began running toward the crowd. One of the individuals fired 3 rounds, striking Gamboa and tragically striking the man who later died.
What is the role of a peacekeeper? What does a peacekeeper really actually do? So here's what we found out. The Peace and Justice Action League of Spokane says the peacekeepers are trained demonstrators who help the flow and the tone of a demonstration. They're there to diffuse and de-escalate conflicts. They help maintain energy by constructively participating in the demonstration. And they act as a buffer between demonstrators and police.
Okay, so this is what I've determined with this particular situation. One, the peacekeepers are not the oath keepers. This isn't a far right-wing group that's somehow cooperating with law enforcement officers, but it's likely veteran law enforcement officers, maybe even reserve law enforcement officers who are allowed to carry, that are directly communicating and coordinating with law enforcement, being embedded in the crowds. This Gamboa character that was shot but also charged, he's not the shooter. He wasn't the one who shot the victim who passed away in the hospital, who was an innocent protester, who got caught in the crossfire. This person allegedly was putting together an AR in a crowded area and putting it into battery or getting it ready to do a mass shooting. At least that's what the peacekeeper and the police officers allege. Now, this report says they've identified who the shooter is, except they never identify the shooter. So here's my speculation. My speculation here is the person who's the shooter is either a reserve or a retired law enforcement officer who was there carrying, maybe even openly carrying, and was a member of this group that's called Peacekeeper. Again, not to be confused with a fringe group like the Oath Keepers, which a lot of people in the comments were like, I knew it was some far-right extreme. It's not. They were cooperating and working with law enforcement, which is one of the reasons why I think the shooter hasn't been identified and why they've charged the person who was shot, who was trying to pull out the AR, they charged them with murder. Now, there is another news story that I saw that talked about the legalities and how difficult it's going to be to charge a person for murder, first degree. They didn't pull the trigger. They just caused the incident, is what they're saying. Tragic situation. Why is that not being talked about anywhere in the national media? Even KSL and some of the local news stations are reporting on this event as if nobody was killed. The headline doesn't even read somebody was killed. It reads, police give update on shooting in Salt Lake City. Now, I understand they don't want the bad PR, but that's what I'm talking about. Like, nobody's telling the truth. So if you haven't seen it, this Vance Bolter character, this guy who killed these Minnesota lawmakers, was rolled up. They wound up discovering his vehicle over the weekend and ended up finding him near one of his properties. On top of that, which we'll talk about later this week, we have this situation going on with Iran and Israel. It's a dire situation. The only good news that I've seen in the last 24 hours of the news cycle is Iran is willing to talk to the U.S. to negotiate some kind of deal because they know what's up. If they lob a missile into a base and wind up killing Americans, it's game over. They know that. They'll be eviscerated off the face of the planet. They need to come to the table and they need to work this out diplomatically. Now, that's easier said than done, especially Iran just killed a whole bunch of civilians in Israel over the weekend. Guys, there's a lot of things to talk about in the underground, and I'll see you guys about midweek to catch you up on this Iran-Israel deal. Till next time, peace out, guys.